So as you may have noticed, this video is a lot longer than the type of content that I normally release on this channel, and that's because I'm trying something new. I'm starting a new series that may eventually become a podcast. The reason for it is that I've been thinking a lot about how climate change is a global issue, and it's going to take a lot of people from different places in the world and from different perspectives, a lot of people working together. And it seems weird to be making a YouTube channel about climate change that is just me, just one person, and giving just my perspective. So I wanted to try and remedy that. And I also have a lot to learn from people around the world, a lot of people that have been working on climate change for much longer than me. So I want to share their perspectives with you. So I've started interviewing people for this channel, politicians, writers, all sorts of climate activists from around the world, and it's been really exciting for me to get to meet them, and I'm really looking forward to sharing these chats with you. Starting this series off is a conversation that I had with Amita Kuttner, who is an astronomer and astrophysicist and a candidate for the Green Party leadership contest in Canada. We kept this conversation pretty broad, so no matter where you are in the world, you should be able to get something out of it. Just to give the briefest amount of context about Canadian politics, there are several political parties in Canada, and the environmental party is called the Green Party of Canada, and Amita is currently running in a campaign to become the leader of that party. If you want to learn more about that campaign and about this entire leadership contest, there's some info in the description. The important thing to know is that in order to vote, you just need to be a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident, and you need to be 14 years or older, and you need to register for the Green Party to be a member by the end of the month. You need to do that before September in order to be able to vote in a month from now. When I realized that I needed to get more involved in climate action, I started going to protests and to marches, and I started sharing more on social media and here on this YouTube channel, and I also started volunteering for political candidates that had strong climate policies and that would be climate leaders. And Amita is one of those people. They have a very science-based approach to things, and they truly understand the climate crisis that we're in. So I've been volunteering for their campaign with them, and it has been wonderful, and I'm excited to share this conversation I had with them with you. Okay, hello and welcome. I'm so glad you're here, and I'm excited to chat with you. The key thing on this channel that we talk about is climate change. When people, I think, talk about climate change, especially when I've seen other politicians talk about climate change, it's something that is happening far off, far away to other people, maybe people that aren't even born yet. And I think that that's, partly a natural response. I think people are a bit in denial about it, but I also think it's just that people haven't yet fully personally understood the magnitude of the crisis that we're in. And you've talked a bit about the ways that climate change has impacted you and your family, and I would love if you could share that story, if it's okay with you.
Yes, absolutely it is, and I think that there's always an element of human psychology in terms of what we remember as normal. So as the climate is shifting, we only look back a couple of years and we say, oh, well, this is how it's been. But if you look at the data, and if you even look at weather for the last 5 years, it's changed noticeably. And also a lot of the discussion happens in countries with a lot of prosperity. So what's going on in the global south and increased hurricanes, fires, floods and all that, and droughts and heat waves can just be like, oh, well, sure, it's going on over there to them and they're always having a horrible time. Why should I care? Colonial, got other elemental problems in there as well. But until it comes home and is connected to the climate crisis in our experience, it doesn't get personal and in a way that we feel the urgency of it. And so in Canada, we have been seeing effects for a lot of years. Worsened forest fires, tornadoes in places that shouldn't have tornadoes, flooding, and just large-scale shifts in ecosystems that are noticeable, permafrost melt in the Arctic, for instance. And so what happened to my family was in 2005. And it's not fully clear whether it was climate change related, though we know that the climate was already shifting by then.
And no disaster is clearly climate change related. You can never prove things like that in science. It's just not how science works.
Exactly. And so it's often the severity of the event effects that are changing rather than the existence. Although tornadoes showing up where they never have been before, yeah, probably. But the links are going to be scientific.
Yeah. And we can say that these are the sorts of things that we would expect to see given climate change.
Yes, and the events will worsen and they will be more frequent. So what happened to my family was in 2005, it was an atmospheric river, which means there was an accumulation of clouds over the Pacific that headed straight for us, often called a Pineapple Express around here. But so there's just a concentration of moisture, and it hits the mountains in North Vancouver and just dumps. And it doesn't, of course, have to be North Vancouver. It can be anywhere that it finally just rains a ton. And what happened is the house that my family was living in, I was actually away at boarding school in California. That's why I'm alive. But the house was on unstable ground to some extent. So with all this moisture, there was a mudslide. It took out my house. It didn't take out much else. But it killed my mother and left my dad with lasting brain damage and physical injury. And there were a number of factors that were responsible for this, including the fact that the house shouldn't have been built there without other stuff done to the embankment, and a bit of responsibility on people not taking care of the slope from above. But, that excess moisture showing up caused the mudslide. And we see mudslides like that relatively frequently in British Columbia when you have strong rains, but as we're expecting more and more, this is the type of hazard that's turning up. And in the way that we prepare, we need to be ready for drainage and understanding, and how to also make sure that we're not putting things in places that are going to have these problems, and use the ecosystem to properly make it robust against these changes and against extreme weather.
Thanks for sharing that first. And yeah, I've thought a lot about, first thing that comes to mind when I think about climate change is firstly that we need to keep the fossil fuels in the ground. And, I've been really frustrated that our government and most governments around the world are failing horribly, miserably to do that. But then the next thing that I've always really just intuitively hoped or felt or dreamed is that we would be prepared for the disasters that are coming. That we're even if we stopped emitting fuels and emitting carbon now, we're locked into at least maybe 1 or 2 degrees of warming, right? And there's a lot of natural disasters that are going to be caused by that. And I've always hoped that we would be getting prepared for that. And this pandemic has been a really, really strong reminder that our governments aren't prepared, and we should. Frankly, that makes me terrified. And I'm not saying that everybody should walk around all day being scared, but I do think it's something that we need to see more of in our leadership. We need to see, like you're saying, these sorts of preparedness measurements.
Yeah, it scares me too, and I think because of what happened to me, I exist with that ongoing reality and threat. And it worries me. And I'm a nerd, so I don't mind the climate policy and the discussions that we have around carbon emissions and all the structural changes that need to happen in the way that we can make things work. But it completely ignores the on-the-ground effects and experiences of people. And it really reinforces how not seriously the problem is being taken. And that's why I'm doing this to some extent, because I don't want to have everybody have to experience what I went through. And it's not like preparing communities and developing resiliency, both as individuals, as groups, as communities, and as actual places, municipalities, provinces, whatever it takes to actually make our systems robust and our infrastructure robust. It's not like that stuff's that hard, but we're just ignoring it. And if that piece is left out entirely, you're right. It doesn't matter if we manage to stop our emissions or even turn it the other way, because we're locked into a bunch of chaos, and now a bunch of chaos that we're not prepared for.
The very first time, and I forget exactly when it was or what it was in an interview somewhere, sometime, you told that story, and as you just said, it became very clear to me that this is such an important issue to you, that you get it, you understand that it's an emergency, and you understand that we need to be treating it like an emergency. And that's what really drew me to not just want to vote for you in the race, but also wanted to volunteer with your group, because I think just a lot of people just don't get that, unfortunately. Another thing that I've kind of taken away from the experience in volunteering, which has been delightful, is that you really keep diversity at the center of every conversation. And I think that there's two kind of things to this. One is that obviously, like, we need representation, and we need to, like, totally rethink our society in ways that are more just and equitable. But also, like, we need a just transition. And I want you to explain what that means. But I think that we need those things in order to solve climate change. And I think that that's not clear to people. And if you could just speak to that, and then I want to talk a little bit about diversity. I threw a lot of things at you.
So much at once. That's fine. So with a just transition, the idea is that we're heading for large-scale transformation, and it's going to happen one way or another. And the one that would be positive is that we take measures ahead of time, decide just to head towards a zero-carbon economy and all the other similar emissions that are really problematic, and change our way of life and way of work and the industries that we have in order to survive. But and the other option is that we wait too long and then we're forced to shift, and it's just horrible. But given that opportunity, what happens is with our current economic system and everything, it's really disincentivized because of what we think about as necessary economic growth or whatever. But we can't leave the people out of the conversation. And so in any large-scale economic or societal transition, you should be taking care of the people. And we've watched with the Industrial Revolution the concerns over that and the changes of work. It worked out. And now what we're going to be having to do, both with climate but also with automation, is do that at a much larger scale over a lot of industries again. But it's, there is actually an option that we have to say, we take care of every individual. We involve them in the discussions of plotting the path to where different communities want to go, what work we want to do, and especially focusing that work towards the transition we need towards clean energy and all the other things that we have to do to get ready, including the on-the-ground preparations and efficiency work. And in doing that, we can and we should be taking care of everybody, and we will come out of that in a much better place and much stronger, and the transition will also happen better if we do that, which is, sometimes it's talked about in a way where you say, well, I want to also care about these things, about justice, about workers, for instance, but I feel like that's not entirely framed right. It's to our benefit to say, let's do this all at once, because it'll actually be easier.
Yeah, I think a lot about how, I obviously think all the time about climate change. That's like where my brain is always going. But especially this year, it's been hard not to compare it to COVID and our response in particular to COVID. And you talk about it being easier to just like take care of people and to make that transition to a green economy in a way that is just for everyone. It's not only easier, but it's better. But I see such a clear parallel between that and COVID. If you look at different countries, just based on how much government support, like how much money did people get from the government when they could no longer go to work, and if you look at different countries, not only are they having more or less riots depending on how much these people were given. Right now it's, I think, close to half of Americans can't pay their rent or their mortgage, right? But not only that, like the rates of infection are dependent on that. Like if people are forced to go to work because they can't pay for things, then the issue is going to get worse, right? And I think that has, like, that sort of is there's a similarity there for me. It's like we could have a universal basic income, or in your platform, I think you call it a guaranteed
livable income. So that you're saying you want to actually guarantee that people have enough to live in some way or another. And you can start that with a basic UBI and then shift it going down the road in a number of directions.
Yeah. It just seems like that is the only way. Something like that, or something very much like that, will be the only way that we will be able to move forward.
I will just add there that I think that maybe this is a little bit of a absurd or daring thing to actually say, but I think that there's a disconnect in the way that people conceptualize the economy, and they forget that there's people. And then that actually the majority of the world at the moment, especially in North America, are people who can barely survive. And yet, without them, do you think we have an economy? It's like, even the people with a lot, they depend on that. It doesn't work the other way around.
Going back to talking about diversity, which I think is a key part in a just transition, and right now, and I think COVID again is a good example of this, how well off you are and how privileged you are makes a big difference right now for your safety, which is wrong, for lack of a better word. Like I kind of struggle to get my head around that. But when we talk about diversity, I think that honestly, it's one of the big reasons I think for a lot of people that a lot of people just don't care about politics, and they don't feel like they're a part of the process. And I have some stats that I thought were just kind of mind-blowing. I love stats. I was looking through history. We've had 23 prime ministers in Canada. All but one of them was a man. All of them were white. I'm pretty sure, and I couldn't find anything on this, that they were all straight. There were no LGBTQ plus, as far as I know.
Yeah, or they weren't out.
But
unlikely.
Most were very old, or are very old. Aside from Justin Trudeau is, I think, the youngest ever. But the average age is 55 for a prime minister, which is... So we're talking lots of old white men mostly so far, and they're extremely wealthy, which is, I think, maybe the not an unrelated factor, but something that's really important. For example, Justin Trudeau's net worth is over $10 million. And I think that when people, people don't relate to these politicians, and I can't blame them, even as a white man, a straight white man. But I feel like you're coming into this from a very different perspective, and I'm kind of wondering, not to run through a checklist, but I'm kind of wondering...
You can run through a checklist, I don't mind.
Well, so you're not white, you're non-binary, you're young,
I'm 29.
You're 29. Younger than me. And as far as I know, you're not a multi-millionaire or a billionaire. And I'm wondering partly, what has this been like for you as someone that is a candidate for a political candidate, because this also isn't your first race, and what has it been like? What is the sort of feedback you've been getting?
Yeah, well, I want to talk about diversity in general for a second.
Absolutely.
But I do have my own set of privileges that has allowed me to have the life that I have, and also some financial ability that partially came because my parents were very careful, and we're both college instructors, but also because of what happened in my family. But that's the thing, I think, when we talk about inclusivity and diversity, is that it's really easy to put people in boxes. And when you're dealing with a history of marginalization, oppression, and systemic problems, especially around systemic marginalization, it's really complicated, and you can never judge somebody by any category or any assumption as to whether they've had an easy time or not, because there's so much going on with every individual. So I did work in diversity and inclusion in university for a long time, also very old, white, straight, male environment and physics. And this is where I got to, was that it is about not judging and trying to actually create equal access and participation for everybody. And I see that reflected in politics. We want to have a representative democracy, which means we need representation, but it also means that the people that are there, being the representatives, need to have their voices and their presence have equal weight to the people that are usually there. And so what the conversation has turned into for me is less about the concept of diversity, though it's important because you get all the different perspectives and lived experience, because nobody can ever perfectly represent. It's about actually creating the spaces of belonging for all these people, because right now it's just ridiculous. Why would you go into politics when that's what it looks like, that's what it feels like? And especially having a complex intersectional identity, there's a lot of microaggressions, and their barriers to entry, to participation, to staying there are high. And so anybody showing up, why stay? if especially, you know, it's not accomplishing anything, there's so much to get by, there's other ways to advocate, why be there? And so the second is somebody experiences something not great, there's really no reason to stay. And so we've disincentivized diversity and participation and democracy by the way that we've allowed the systems to continue. And so for me, it's about creating space and creating belonging, and not pushing anybody out, but getting that balance of perspectives in and making room for other people. And it's been interesting, and I also think because I'm aware to some extent of the privileges that I do have. And I generally say like layers of privilege and intersections of identity. So you get like, okay, well we shouldn't be thinking of this as like some checklist that we're like, you can checklist to list things of a person, sure, but like we shouldn't be going, well, once you have this, you don't have this, let's see, this means you have this score. Like, it doesn't quite work that way. It really is about the person's experience. And it's been rough. And so, but I keep going because I feel the responsibility I have because of my privileges to continue to work and to make that space. And so much about the way that we are running the campaign isn't really about the identity of the people, but about making the space something that anybody could feel safe in. And that includes the way we talk to each other, we work with each other, we are willing to change and evolve and admit when we're not always right. But right now, I mean, I don't really have wonderful things to say about the political space for, I don't know, somebody like me, whatever that means. Because there's a lot of lack of understanding, and all I want is acceptance. And I don't really want to focus on identity, but it changes things for people. And that means we have a long way to go. So there's the regular internet stuff, which is just the internet, and I kind of just ignore it. I mean, there was the week that we got like hundreds of like transphobic messages because we got close to the gender critical movement, and that was weird. But the problematic ones are people who actually say things in person that bring into question my existence, my validity as a person, it's dehumanizing things. And people feel completely at ease to do that because it's their space. And then you get that perspective that it is their space. It is somebody else's space. And so a lot of the conversations about diversity and inclusion are talking about making space within that space for other people, but it's not about claiming the entire thing for everybody, which is what we actually need to do.
Yeah, and I feel like, and this is kind of what I led with, I feel like I feel that when I'm, even as someone with like all of the layers of privilege, I feel that when I'm in, and we're on a Zoom chat, I can rely on the fact that diversity will be at the center of that conversation, and that people will, be as welcomed as you possibly can make them. And it just feels like a very different place. And I think everybody's more cheerful because of it. And it's a good experience.
It's lovely. I'm very proud of everybody. It's amazing, and I think we also set out with the intention to keep working on it so that we create the space that we want politics to actually be. Basically, we're done with this. This doesn't work. Let's just recreate what we want, and then let's grow that space.
Just a quick reminder that if you want to help grow this space, then there's information in the description for how you can help with Amita's campaign or help by voting for them. And lastly, here's what they said when I asked if there was anything that they wanted to add to this video.
I want to leave people thinking about something with this, and with especially globally, because we're at this, I think, a pivot point, and if we choose to take it. And sure, we can figure out how to get involved in government, but now is the moment to actually dream as well. Like, what do we want the world to be? We've been so stuck in these mindsets of how everything runs in the status quo, we've just accepted it. And it's time that we break through and break free of that to talk about what we actually would like to have and then work on it. And what's missing often in these conversations is what leadership actually is. So we talk about policy all the time and what needs to be done, but we also need to be talking about what leadership means in terms of empowering people, in terms of how someone actually talks and communicates, what drives them, and the space that they create. Because that will be part of what defines a political movement. And we often leave that out. We say qualifications and policy.
That's it for now, but I'm going to be putting out more videos like this in the future, and hopefully going to be releasing content more regularly, so please stay tuned for that, and thanks for watching.